All right, and this time we are going to look at application, and we're going to use and we're going to use Psalm 1 as our model. And what I'd like us to do is, I'll read the psalm. Maybe we'll make just a few basic observations, then we'll move into theology, and then we'll see if we can come up with at least one good principle based on the theology of Psalm 1, and then see if we can come up with one or two smart applications from that principle. So Psalm 1. How blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. And he will be like a tree firmly planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither, and in whatever he does he prospers. The wicked are not so, but they are like chaff, which the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Just a few basic observations. It's interesting that this psalm is laid out in a huge contrast, is probably one of the biggest things that we see here. So we have the person who is blessed is basically the first part of the psalm, and it starts out negative, and then it's contrasted positively. So the man is blessed who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, stand in the path of sinners, sit in the seat of scoffers. But, big contrast, structural marker of the psalm, his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. And then there's an illustration of what this person is like. He's like a tree. And then we have another contrast. The wicked are not so, but they're like chaff which the wind drives away. And you probably could have a hard time coming up with any contrast that's any starker than between a tree planted by streams of water and chaff. One weighty, one solid, one well-rooted, one fruitful, and one that is totally light, weightless, worthless, fruitless, and without any stability. So just a few observations. And the difference between the righteous and the wicked in this psalm is their response to the word of the Lord and who it is that they draw their information for living from. So if we were going to do some thinking about the theology of this psalm, we ask that first question, what do we learn about God? What's the vision of God? There's not a lot here. So we might have to infer a bit. Probably what we have is we have verse 2, the law of the Lord and his law. And then verse 6, we have the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. I suspect that the fundamental image here, even though it's not spelled out in great detail, is God as king, God as lawgiver. Okay? And so God is the one who's given his law. He expects it to be obeyed. Good things will happen to those who obey the law. Bad things will happen to those who don't obey the law. That's the fundamental vision of God in this psalm. The view then of depraved man is what? It's, well, that man is not willing to accept or submit himself to the law of God. He's not submitting himself or herself to the kingship of God. He thinks that he knows a better way to live than the way that God has said is the way to live. That's the typical human response. And then the relationship that should be between God and man is that man should trust God and realize that because God is good, God provides good things, that he's provided the law. The law is a good thing. The law is a good perspective on life. I will trust him and I will pursue his perspective on life. That's the fundamental theology behind this particular psalm. Now, we could ask, what is a principle that we might glean from this passage and its theology? We could come up with something like this. We should listen to God rather than the ungodly people of our society. I think that's a fairly safe, fairly solid principle that arises out of the theology of this text. We should listen to God rather than the ungodly people of our society. Okay, now what we can do and what we should do to go the next step would be, how can we turn this general statement of truth that the passage is teaching us about life and how we ought to live, how do we take that the next step and turn it into a smart application for our life? Let's think again about what SMART stands for. It's an acrostic, so S is stretching. So we're talking about something that I'm not already doing, something that is new and something that is a stretch for me to do. M is measurable, so I'm going to know at the end whether I've done it or not. A is either attainable or achievable, so it's something that I can realistically accomplish by God's grace working in my life. Relevant, something that is significant and important for me to do. Memorizing this in Hebrew probably isn't that relevant or important for me to do, so I wouldn't have that as a SMART goal. T then is time related. When am I going to do this? So let's see if we can come up with one or two smart applications of our principle. Again, our principle is we should listen to God rather than the ungodly people of our society. One I came up with is stated like this. Since I've been watching too much indiscriminate TV, I will begin to put controls on what I watch, because most of what's on TV is not giving me God's perspective on life, is it? So at the beginning of every week, I will go through the TV program guide for the next week and select only those programs that I should and really want to be watching. So I'm not just flicking channels, wasting time, watching stuff that may not be good for me, but I'm being intentional about what I'm allowing into my life, into my brain. Okay, I think that's a pretty smart application, especially if I say I'm going to do this, maybe Sunday night at the beginning of my week. I'm going to record it to the hard drive, something like that. A second smart application might be that at the same time, I'm going to set aside 15 minutes a day, and maybe at a set time every day, maybe say 15 minutes while I'm having my cup of coffee in the morning, and I'm going to study the Bible and I'm going to pray. I'm going to try to get God's perspective. Now, I think that that's probably a pretty smart set of applications, very relevant for many of us, to set up a minimum of 15 minutes a day where we're listening to God, and we're limiting probably our TV watching to a couple hours a day. 15 minutes, couple hours a day. That should be achievable. And it should be something that's going to help move us on the way to taking God and taking His Word seriously as we live our lives.